My sister's husband called me a beggar in front of the entire bank. He laughed at my $50 request, making sure every wealthy client heard him. I stared him down and said absolutely nothing. Then I withdrew $2 billion. The entire room froze and he fell to his knees. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your true worth. I stood at the polished mahogany counter of Prestige Trust Bank. It was a Tuesday morning. The air conditioning hummed quietly over the soft classical music that played in the background. The lobby smelled of expensive leather and old money. I was dressed for comfort, wearing my faded gray Howard University hoodie and a pair of vintage Levi jeans. To the untrained eye, I looked like someone who had wandered in off the street searching for directions. But that Howard hoodie meant everything to me. It was the last thing my grandmother bought me before she passed away. She was the only person in my family who believed in my vision before it had a dollar sign attached to it. When I chose to leave university to build my financial technology platform, she did not call me a failure. She told me to build something that would change the world. I was at the bank for a simple reason. I calmly asked the teller to waive a $50 maintenance fee on a dormant legacy account. It was a small savings account my late grandmother had opened for me when I was just a little girl. I kept it open purely for sentimental reasons. That account held exactly $200, the original seed money she gave me when I was a teenager. I refused to let an automated administrative fee eat away at her memory. Any standard bank protocol would waive it immediately for a long-standing customer. The teller, a young woman with a tight bun and a nervous smile, tapped away at her keyboard trying to process the simple request. She frowned at her screen. But before she could finish typing, the heavy glass door of the vice president office swung open. I did not even need to turn around to know who it was. The sharp, aggressive click of expensive Italian leather shoes hitting the marble floor echoed through the quiet lobby. It was Preston, my sister Jasmine's husband. Preston was a tall white man who carried his mediocre achievements with the unearned confidence of someone who had never been told no. He was the branch vice president, a title my father DeAndre had practically bought for him by moving his lucrative logistics company accounts to this specific branch. Preston enjoyed wielding his limited power. He loved the pristine suits, the corner office, and the way the tellers scrambled when he cleared his throat. Marrying my sister Jasmine, the undisputed golden child of the Washington family, had given him a VIP pass to look down on me. Our parents worshipped the ground Preston walked on simply because he fit their aesthetic ideal of corporate success. He was safe. He was everything I was not. Preston did not just walk over to the teller station. He strutted. He stopped right beside me, deliberately invading my personal space. He looked me up and down, taking in my worn hoodie and casual sneakers. His lips curled into a sneer that I had seen countless times at family Sunday dinners. He leaned against the counter, placing his hands flat on the marble, and intentionally projected his voice so that every affluent client in the lobby could hear him clearly. "We do not serve beggars here, Chloe," he announced, the words slicing through the quiet hum of the bank. "This is a premium financial institution, not a charity for college dropouts." The words hung heavily in the cold air. The subtle clinking of coffee cups in the waiting area stopped completely. A man in a tailored suit lowered his newspaper. A woman clutching a designer handbag turned her head to stare at me. I could feel the collective weight of their judgment settling on my shoulders. A black woman in a hoodie being publicly humiliated by a white bank executive. It was a scene straight out of a stereotype, and Preston knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to make me feel small. He wanted to remind me that in his world, and in my family's eyes, I was nothing but a failure who could not even afford a simple banking fee. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the faint whir of the security cameras rotating above us. The teller stopped typing, her hands hovering paralyzed over the keyboard. She looked terrified, caught between assisting a customer and obeying her arrogant boss. I saw her eyes dart toward my face, searching for a reaction. She expected me to shrink. She expected me to apologize or grab my purse and run out the glass doors in tears. I stood perfectly still. I did not break eye contact with Preston. His face was flushed with the thrill of his own cruelty. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the emotional outburst that he could use to have security escort me off the premises. Before I could even formulate a response to his blatant disrespect, the heavy glass doors of Preston's office swung wide open again. Out walked my sister Jasmine, followed closely by my parents Vivian and DeAndre. They were a walking billboard for new money. Jasmine wore a pristine white designer pantsuit, her hair laid to absolute perfection. My mother, Vivian, draped herself in cashmere while my father adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke blazer. They were all glowing, holding a thick stack of freshly signed documents. They were finalizing a massive mortgage approval for Jasmine's new estate, a sprawling property that was meant to solidify her status as the family's ultimate success story. Jasmine spotted me first. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer embarrassment. She hurried over her heels, clicking sharply against the floor. "Chloe, what are you doing here?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but entirely laced with venom. "You look like you just rolled out of bed. We are conducting serious business today." My mother stepped up right beside her, crossing her arms over her cashmere wrap. Vivian rolled her eyes, looking me up and down, with the familiar disdain I had endured my entire life. "Stop embarrassing the family, Chloe," she scolded, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "If you had not dropped out of Howard to chase that foolish online pipe dream, you would not be standing here begging Preston for $50. Learn your place and stop making a scene." My father, DeAndre, simply shook his head, refusing to even make eye contact with me. He patted Preston on the shoulder, a gesture of male solidarity that made my stomach churn. Jasmine leaned against the marble counter, inspecting her flawless manicure, as if my presence was a temporary bad smell she just had to endure. "Do not spend your last few pennies all in one place, sis," she mocked. "Mom and Dad are not going to bail you out again. Strong Black women do not ask for handouts. Remember, go back to selling whatever little app you are hustling out of your trunk. Let the adults handle the real money." They stood there, a united front of arrogance and condescension, my own flesh and blood teaming up with a man who had just publicly humiliated me. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to bow my head and scurry out of the bank so they could go back to celebrating their borrowed wealth. But I did not cry. I did not defend my past or try to explain the endless nights I spent building my company from the ground up. I simply smiled. It was a cold, deadpan smile that did not reach my eyes. I saw Preston's smug grin falter for a fraction of a second. He recognized that smile. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards. I reached into the front pocket of my faded jeans. I did not raise my voice or match their frantic, toxic energy. I pulled out a sleek, solid black titanium card. It had no visible numbers, no standard banking logo, just a heavy metallic finish that caught the light of the chandeliers above. I slid it across the marble counter toward the terrified teller. The heavy metal made a sharp, satisfying sound as it hit the stone. Preston scoffed loudly, waving his hand at the teller. "Cut up whatever prepaid debit card she just handed you," he ordered. "I want her out of my lobby right now." I looked Preston dead in the eye, my voice dropping to a calm, terrifying whisper that forced everyone to lean in just to hear me. "You are absolutely right, Preston," I said evenly. "Close the account. And while you are at it, initiate a full wire transfer to close out my private portfolio. All of it." Preston let out a sharp laugh, assuming I was making a grand gesture over a meager $500. "Do it," he snapped at the teller. "Give her the spare change and get her out of here." The teller picked up the heavy titanium card. Her hands were shaking as she swiped it through her terminal. She stared at her monitor. I watched as all the color completely drained from her face. Her eyes widened in absolute horror. The screen flashed a brilliant warning red reflecting off her glasses. She did not speak. She could not speak. She simply stared at the numbers populating on her screen, numbers with so many zeros they did not fit the standard display formatting. Her breathing hitched and her hands began to violently shake. Without saying a word to Preston, she reached her trembling hand under the heavy mahogany desk and firmly pressed the silent emergency protocol button. The trap was set, and my family had just walked blindly right into it. Before the teller could even form a word to respond to Preston, the heavy frosted glass doors of the executive suite swung wide open. The soft pneumatic hiss of the hinges cut through the dead air of the lobby. Out walked my sister Jasmine, flanked by my parents Vivian and DeAndre. They looked like a living, breathing advertisement for generational wealth. A carefully curated image they spent every waking moment trying to project. Jasmine was draped in a pristine white designer pantsuit, her hair laid to absolute perfection, clutching a thick stack of freshly stamped mortgage documents against her chest. Vivian, my mother, wore her signature camel cashmere wrap, while my father adjusted the cuffs of a bespoke blazer that probably cost more than my first car. They were radiating triumph. They had just finalized the paperwork for Jasmine's new estate, a sprawling multi-million-dollar property meant to cement her status as the undisputed golden child of the Washington family. Preston had personally pushed the loan through his branch. Jasmine spotted me first. The triumphant glow on her face vanished in an instant, replaced by a deep, visceral flush of embarrassment. She marched over her designer heels, clicking sharply against the polished marble, treating the bank floor like her personal runway. "Chloe, what on earth are you doing here?" she hissed, keeping her voice low, but packing every syllable with venom. "You look like you just rolled out of bed. We are conducting serious business today. You are making a scene." My mother stepped up right beside her, crossing her arms tightly over her cashmere wrap. Vivian did not offer a greeting. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the faded letters of my Howard University hoodie, with the familiar suffocating disdain I had endured my entire life. "Stop embarrassing the family, Chloe!" My mother scolded, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. "If you had not dropped out of Howard to chase that foolish online pipe dream, you would not be standing here in a bank lobby begging Preston for $50. Look at you. Look at your sister. Jasmine just closed on a 6-bedroom estate, and you are fighting over pocket change. Learn your place and stop making a spectacle of yourself." My father DeAndre simply shook his head, looking at the ceiling, as if asking the heavens why he had been burdened with such a disappointment. He refused to make eye contact with me. Instead, he reached over and patted Preston on the shoulder, a blatant gesture of male solidarity that made my stomach turn. He was rewarding Preston for putting me in my place. "You have always been so selfish, Chloe," my father finally muttered, his deep voice dripping with disappointment. "We sacrificed our own comfort to make sure you girls had every opportunity. We practically drained our savings to put your sister through law school so this family could have a real legacy. And what did you do? You threw away a perfectly good education to play around on the internet. You owe us respect, and you owe Preston an apology for wasting his staff's time." Jasmine leaned against the marble counter, casually inspecting her flawless manicure, treating my presence like a temporary bad smell she simply had to endure until the janitor arrived. "Exactly," Jasmine chimed in, adjusting the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, a gift Preston had clearly bought on credit. "Do not spend your last few pennies all in one place, sis. Mom and Dad are not going to bail you out again. Strong Black women do not ask for handouts. Remember, go back to your tiny apartment and keep selling whatever little app you are still hustling out of the trunk of your car. You should be grateful Preston even allows you to keep an account open here. Now take your little $50 and go. We have a champagne toast waiting at the country club, and you are ruining the aesthetic. Let the adults handle the real money." They stood there shoulder to shoulder, a united front of arrogance and condescension. My own flesh and blood teaming up with a white man who had just publicly humiliated me. They wanted me to feel small. They expected me to shrink, to bow my head, to apologize for breathing the same premium air as them, and to scurry out of the glass doors so they could go back to celebrating their heavily financed, debt-ridden illusions of grandeur. They were entirely relying on the old version of me, the scapegoat, who used to cry in the car after every family dinner. But I did not cry. I did not defend my past. I did not try to explain the endless, grueling nights I spent coding my platform from the ground up, eating instant noodles while they took luxury vacations. I did not justify my choices. I simply smiled. I looked directly at Preston, then at my sister, and finally at my mother. I offered them a cold, completely deadpan smile that did not reach my eyes. It was a look of absolute terrifying serenity. I saw Preston's smug, triumphant grin falter for a fraction of a second, his brow furrowed. He recognized that smile even if he did not understand it yet. It was not the smile of a defeated woman. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey walk willingly into a trap. The silence in the lobby was deafening, but Preston was completely oblivious to the panic radiating from the teller. He threw his head back and laughed out loud. It was a harsh, grating sound that bounced off the vaulted ceilings. He genuinely thought he had won. He assumed my demand to close out my private portfolio meant transferring a few $100s to a local credit union. My father DeAndre shook his head in absolute disgust. He stepped forward, his bespoke shoes clicking on the marble, aligning himself perfectly with Preston. "You are 35 years old, Chloe," he said, his voice dripping with condescending authority. "Strong black women do not beg for handouts. Your sister passed the bar, she married a bank vice president, and she is carrying this family legacy on her back. You are a walking cautionary tale." He was doing what he always did. He was weaponizing our culture and my sister's conventional success to tear me down. Every time I had tried to explain the software infrastructure I was building, he had shut me down, telling me to get a real job with a real paycheck. To him, a desk at a cubicle was worth more than owning the entire building. I did not look at my father. I kept my eyes on the teller. She was staring at her screen as if it had just grown fangs. "Sir," she stammered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. "Sir, I cannot process this. The system is overriding my credentials." Preston stopped laughing. His face contorted with intense irritation. He practically shoved the young woman aside, marching behind the counter to look at the monitor himself. I knew exactly what he was planning. He wanted to read my pathetic account balance out loud to the entire lobby to deliver the final killing blow to my dignity. "Move out of the way," he snapped, snatching the mouse from her grip. "Let me show this girl exactly what zero looks like." He planted his hands on the desk and stared at the high-resolution monitor. I watched the exact moment his reality shattered. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a tailored suit. His arrogant posture collapsed. He tapped the screen with a shaking finger. He hit the refresh key, wildly mashing the plastic button. The numbers did not change. They sat there glaring back at him, 10 digits long commas placed perfectly across the screen. $2 billion. Preston started to hyperventilate. His chest heaved and his mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. The smug superiority vanished, replaced by raw, unadulterated terror. Jasmine huffed loudly, crossing her arms and tapping her designer heel against the floor. "What is the holdup, Preston?" she demanded, her tone laced with deep impatience. "Just give her the $50 so we can go celebrate my new house. The champagne is getting warm." Preston could not answer her. He could not even form a syllable. But before Jasmine could complain again, the heavy double doors at the top of the grand marble staircase burst open. Panicked footsteps echoed rapidly down the steps. It was Arthur Sterling, the regional director of Prestige Trust Bank, and the man who held Preston's entire career in the palm of his hand. Arthur was not walking. He was sprinting. He bypassed the velvet ropes, ignored the bewildered wealthy clients in the waiting area, and completely disregarded Preston, who was still gasping for air behind the teller window. Arthur stopped directly in front of me. He was sweating through his expensive tailored suit, his chest heaving from the sprint. To the absolute shock of my parents and my sister, he bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep corporate reverence. "Ms. Washington," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "Please let me apologize for this unacceptable delay. There has been a gross miscommunication. If you could just step into the VIP suite with me, we can discuss this immediately." Preston finally found his voice, though it was weak and trembling. "Arthur," he stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What are you doing? She is just my broke sister-in-law. She is a college dropout. There is a glitch in the mainframe." Arthur whipped his head around, his eyes blazing with a fury that made my father physically take a step back. "Shut your mouth, Preston!" Arthur roared, his voice echoing off the marble walls. Ms. Washington moving $2 billion without a 30-day notice will trigger an immediate liquidity crisis for this entire regional branch. It will drain our reserves and put us in violation of federal banking regulations. Do you understand what you have just done? You just insulted the sole founder and CEO of OraPay. You just insulted the largest single private asset holder in this institution. The entire bank went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Jasmine dropped her designer handbag. The heavy leather hit the floor with a thud, spilling her perfectly organized makeup and keys across the marble. DeAndre stood frozen, his mouth hanging open, his pristine blazer suddenly looking very cheap compared to the staggering wealth that had just been announced. My mother, Vivian, clutched her cashmere wrap, her eyes darting frantically between me and the sweating regional director, as her brain short-circuited trying to process the fact that the daughter she had just called a beggar was a billionaire. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice or demand an apology. I calmly accepted a glass of sparkling water from a terrified junior associate who had rushed over with a silver tray. I took a slow, deliberate sip, relishing the absolute destruction of their reality. Then I turned to Arthur. "Lead the way, Arthur," I said smoothly, my voice perfectly steady. "Let us discuss how quickly you can empty this branch of my assets." I walked toward the frosted glass doors of the VIP suite, leaving my family paralyzed in the lobby. But they did not stay paralyzed for long. The sheer magnitude of the money, the realization of what they had just witnessed, snapped them out of their shock. They scrambled after me, abandoning all sense of decorum or bank protocol. Preston stumbled out from behind the teller counter, his face flushed with panic. My parents and sister chased right behind him, pushing past the velvet ropes. We entered the expansive VIP suite with its rich mahogany walls and plush leather seating. I sat down at the head of the conference table, crossing my legs and setting my sparkling water on a coaster. Preston burst into the room, looking like a man facing a firing squad. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "It is a mistake," he pleaded, looking desperately at Arthur. "She cannot have $2 billion. She lives in a tiny apartment. She is a failure. She sells some little app out of her trunk. It is a scam." Arthur looked at Preston with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. He pulled a thick, embossed folder from his briefcase and threw it onto the polished table right in front of Preston. "Read it yourself," he commanded coldly. "There is no glitch. There is no scam. Ms. Washington built OraPay from the ground up. It went public on Wall Street yesterday morning. She retained a 70% equity stake and liquidated a portion of her shares directly into this private portfolio. She is not a failure, Preston. She is a financial titan, and you just told her we do not serve beggars." Preston stared at this printed portfolio summary. The numbers were undeniable, verified by the highest levels of the Federal Reserve. His arrogance evaporated instantly, replaced by pure, unadulterated desperation. He realized in real time that his career, his upcoming promotion to regional vice president, and his entire livelihood depended solely on me keeping my capital in his branch. If I pulled the money, the branch would collapse, and he would be blacklisted from the financial sector forever. He fell to his knees on the plush carpet. The expensive fabric of his suit gathered around his legs as he clasped his hands together. "Chloe, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I was joking. It was just a stupid family joke. Please do not do this to me. I will lose everything." Watching the powerful white bank executive drop to his knees in front of me caused something inside my mother to snap. Vivienne could not handle the shift in power. Her golden son-in-law was groveling, and the daughter she despised was holding the axe. But instead of apologizing, she executed the most toxic, calculated pivot I had ever witnessed. Her disdain vanished entirely, replaced by a sickening, sugary sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Oh, my brilliant girl!" she exclaimed, stepping forward with her hands clasped to her chest. "I knew it. I always knew my tough love pushed you to greatness. We had to be hard on you so you would build this empire. Well, since you have been hiding this immense wealth from your own blood, The absolute least you can do is pay off your sister's new mortgage right now. It is family duty, Chloe. Jasmine recovered her senses instantly, nodding eagerly, her greed overriding her humiliation. Yes, she demanded, stepping next to our mother. You owe us for putting up with your attitude all these years. Pay off the estate today. It is only 3 million. That is nothing to you now. I looked at the two women standing before me, demanding a cut of the empire they had tried to destroy. I took another slow sip of my sparkling water, feeling the bubbles burst against my tongue. I set the glass down and smiled coldly. I do not need to pay off her mortgage. Mother, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm pitch. I already bought the commercial real estate holding firm that owns it. Preston threw his head back and let out a sharp, barking laugh that echoed across the vaulted ceilings of the bank lobby. The sound was abrasive and entirely devoid of genuine humor. He looked at the heavy black titanium card sitting on the marble counter, and then looked back at me as if I were a comedian who had just delivered the punchline of the century. A full wire transfer, he mocked, slapping his hand against the glass partition. What exactly are you transferring, Chloe? Your last $500. Do you want it in crisp $1 bills so you can fan it out on your bed and pretend you finally made it? He turned to the young teller behind the glass. Her name tag read Rachel. Go ahead, Rachel, he commanded with a flick of his wrist. Cash her out, empty the piggy bank, and get her out of my lobby. My father stepped forward, completely ignoring the sheer disrespect Preston had just hurled at his own daughter. DeAndre Washington was a man who demanded reverence simply by occupying space. He adjusted the lapels of his custom blazer and looked down at me with a mixture of pity and absolute revulsion. He shook his head slowly, clicking his tongue against his teeth. You are 35 years old, Chloe? He began, his voice a low, rumbling baritone, designed to command attention from everyone within a 50-foot radius. It is pathetic. Strong black women do not beg for handouts in public lobbies. They do not run to white institutions asking for favors when they refuse to put in the actual work. Our ancestors fought too hard for us to have a seat at the table, and you are out here acting like a vagrant. Jasmine nodded enthusiastically, linking her arm through Preston's. She rested her head on his tailored shoulder, playing the role of the perfect supportive wife to the letter. She looked at me as if I were a stain on her pristine white designer shoes. They do not drop out of historically black colleges to chase pipe dreams. My father continued, his voice rising in volume. They do not sit in tiny rundown apartments typing on laptops all day pretending to be entrepreneurs. Look at your sister. Look at her, Chloe. He pointed directly at Jasmine, who beamed under his praise. She passed the bar exam on her first try. She married a vice president of a premium financial institution. She just walked out of that office having closed on a 6-bedroom estate. She is carrying the Washington family legacy on her back. She represents exactly what Black excellence is supposed to look like. And what are you? You are a walking cautionary tale. You had the exact same opportunities she did, and you threw them in the garbage because you lacked discipline. My mother Vivian stepped up right beside him, wrapping her cashmere shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her face contorted into a mask of toxic martyrdom. We sacrificed our entire retirement to make sure you girls had a safety net. She added, her voice dripping with fake sorrow. We poured everything into your education, and this is the thanks we get. You showing up dressed like a teenager begging for $50 from the man who actually provides for your sister. You should be down on your knees thanking Preston for even allowing you to stand in a building like this. I listened to them recite the exact same script they had been using against me for the last decade. They had built an entire family mythology around my supposed failure. In their minds, I was the broken, defective child who served only as a dark backdrop to make Jasmine shine even brighter. I did not interrupt them. I let my father finish his grand speech about legacy and hard work. I let my mother sigh heavily and play the ultimate victim. I let Jasmine smirk and adjust her diamond tennis bracelet. I just kept my eyes fixed on Rachel, the teller behind the thick security glass. Rachel was not paying attention to my family's theatrical performance. She had picked up the solid black card and swiped it through her terminal. The moment the magnetic strip registered in the banking system, the atmosphere behind the counter changed instantly. Rachel's hands hovered over her keyboard, trembling so violently I could hear her fingernails rattling against the plastic keys. The reflection of her computer monitor cast a harsh red glow across her pale face. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing visibly. She grabbed her computer mouse, clicking frantically, but the screen remained locked in a flashing crimson warning. She pressed a series of override keys, but the system violently rejected her inputs. "What is taking so long?" Rachel Preston snapped, finally noticing that his employee was not moving. "Just process the withdrawal and cut up that ridiculous piece of metal. I have important clients waiting, and I do not have time to babysit my wife's sister." The young woman slowly raised her head. The color had completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking absolutely terrified. She looked at Preston with wide, panicked eyes, her breathing shallow and rapid. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her on the first attempt. She swallowed again, gripping the edge of her desk to physically steady herself. "Sir," she stammered, her voice shaking so badly the words barely made it past her lips. "Sir, I cannot process this. The system is overriding my credentials." The silence that descended upon the VIP suite was thick enough to choke on. The luxurious mahogany-paneled room, previously a sanctuary for Preston's unearned arrogance, instantly transformed into an airtight interrogation chamber. Jasmine's meticulously maintained composure shattered into a million jagged pieces. The color drained from her perfectly contoured face. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice shrill and trembling, completely devoid of its usual aristocratic purr. "Preston, what is she talking about? Tell me she is lying. Tell me this is some kind of sick joke." Preston was physically shaking. He looked up from the carpet at Arthur Sterling, the regional director, his eyes begging for salvation. But Arthur only offered the cold, hard blade of corporate reality. Arthur cleared his throat, adjusting his tie as he looked at my sister. "Ms. Washington is not lying, Mrs. Blackwood. Her holding company, Apex Capital, finalized the hostile acquisition of Vanguard Estates at 8 o'clock this morning. Vanguard is the primary developer and financier of your new subdivision. Technically speaking, your sister owns the land, the development rights, and the paper for the mortgage contract you are currently holding." Jasmine visibly recoiled as if she had been physically struck. She looked at the thick stack of premium stamped documents in her hands and dropped them onto the polished conference table like they were on fire. The papers scattered across the mahogany, a visual representation of her ruined fantasy. My father, DeAndre, desperately tried to salvage his shattered ego. He puffed out his chest, attempting to use his booming patriarch voice to regain control of a room that had entirely slipped from his grasp. "Now listen here, Chloe," he commanded, pointing a heavy finger at me. "You might have stumbled into some money with this little computer business of yours, but you are still my daughter. You will respect the hierarchy of this family. You will transfer that deed to your sister immediately. It is the Christian thing to do. It is what family does." I looked at the man who had spent my entire life making me feel like a burden. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power never has to shout. Respect is earned. "DeAndre," I said evenly, deliberately dropping the title of Dad. He flinched, stepping back as if I had slapped him. "You spent 35 years calling me a failure." I continued, my voice a steady rhythmic drumbeat. "You stood in the lobby of this bank 5 minutes ago and told me I was a walking cautionary tale. You watched this man." I pointed directly at Preston, "humiliate your daughter in public, and you patted him on the back for it. Do not dare invoke the word family now that you realize I hold the keys to your kingdom." My mother Vivian started crying. They were not tears of remorse, they were tears of raw, panicked realization. Her social standing was her entire life. The thought of her golden child being at the mercy of the family scapegoat was actively destroying her reality. "Chloe, please," she sobbed, reaching a trembling hand out toward me across the wide table. "You misunderstood us. We were just trying to push you. We wanted you to be strong, to be independent. We are so proud of you. You have to believe me, sweetheart." "Stop acting, Vivian," I replied coldly, my expression unmoving. "You are not proud of me. You are terrified of me. There is a distinct difference, and I am no longer blind to it." I turned my attention back to Preston and Arthur. Arthur was standing rigidly at attention, his hands clasped behind his back, waiting for my next command like a soldier awaiting orders from a general. "Arthur," I said, shifting my tone to strict, uncompromising business. "I came into this branch today for one simple reason. I wanted to waive a $50 maintenance fee on a legacy account my late grandmother opened for me. It was a sentimental account. I kept it here out of respect for her memory. Instead, your branch vice president publicly berated me, called me a beggar in front of your premium clientele, and ordered his teller to cut up my card." Arthur's face hardened. He turned a lethal, unforgiving glare toward Preston, who was still kneeling on the carpet. Preston acted entirely outside of all established bank protocols. Arthur said quickly, his voice tight with damage control. "He does not represent the values or the standards of Prestige Trust Bank. I assure you, Ms. Washington, we value your business immensely. What can I do to rectify this situation immediately?" Preston began to openly weep. The arrogant, untouchable executive was crying on the plush carpet, his expensive Italian suit bunching around his knees. "Arthur, please. I have a family. We just closed on the house. I have payments. Please do not fire me. You are already fired." "Preston." Arthur snapped, his voice hitting the room like cracking ice. "You are terminated for cause. Clear out your desk immediately. Security will escort you off the premises in 10 minutes. Jasmine let out a horrific shriek, the sound piercing the heavy silence of the suite. "You cannot fire him. My husband is a vice president. We have a $3 million mortgage. Chloe, do something. Fix this." I stood up slowly from the leather executive chair. I took my time smoothing out the front of my faded Howard University hoodie, the very garment they had mocked just moments ago. "I am doing something," I said calmly. "I am leaving." I looked at Arthur, meeting his panicked gaze. "You have 24 hours to initiate the wire transfer for my entire portfolio. I will be moving my capital to an institution that respects its clients, regardless of whether they are wearing custom bespoke blazers or college hoodies." "Good day, Arthur." I turned and walked toward the frosted glass doors, the heavy silence of the room parting for me like the sea. "Chloe, wait!" My father bellowed, his voice cracking with a desperation I had never heard from him before. "You cannot just walk out on us. We are your blood. You owe us." I paused with my hand on the heavy brass door handle. I did not turn around completely, only glancing back over my shoulder to look at the four of them one last time. Preston was sobbing on the floor, stripped of his title, his pride, and his future. Jasmine was hyperventilating, staring blankly at the useless mortgage papers that now bound her financially to me. Vivian was weeping into her cashmere shawl, realizing her decades of social manipulation had failed completely. And DeAndre was standing there, a broken patriarch, who just realized his empire was built on illusions while mine was built on titanium. "Blood simply means we share genetics," I said quietly, my voice carrying absolute finality. "Loyalty means we are family. You chose your loyalties a long time ago. Now you get to live with the consequences." I pushed the glass doors open and walked out of the VIP suite. The lobby was entirely silent as I made my way across the pristine marble floor. The affluent clients who had stared at me earlier with judgment now watched me with a mixture of profound shock and deep reverence. I walked out through the heavy front doors and stepped into the bright, crisp morning sunlight. The air felt cleaner, sharper, entirely free of the toxic weight I had carried for 35 years. I pulled my phone from my pocket and sent a quick text to my lead developer. "The meeting is done. Prep the press release for the IPO expansion." I did not look back at the bank. I did not look back at my family. They had spent my entire life trying to write my story, casting me as the failure, the outcast, the cautionary tale. But they forgot one crucial detail. I was the one holding the pen, and my real chapter was just beginning. Preston let out a harsh breath through his nose, a sound of pure exasperation. He looked at Rachel as if she were the most incompetent human being on the planet. He did not hear the raw terror in her voice or notice the way her hands were shaking. He only heard a delay in his moment of triumph. To him, this was just a technical glitch delaying the inevitable humiliation of his failure sister-in-law. He slammed his flat palm against the marble counter, making the complimentary bank pens jump in their holders. "Move out of the way, Rachel!" he barked loudly, ensuring the entire lobby could hear his authoritative command. "You cannot even process a simple declined debit card. This is exactly why you are still a junior teller. I asked you to do one simple task, and you are freezing up over a basic system error." He marched around the frosted glass partition, his expensive Italian shoes clicking sharply against the floor. He aggressively shoved his way into her small cubicle, forcing the young woman to step back hard against the metal filing cabinets. She clutched her hands to her chest, her eyes darting between her angry boss and the computer monitor she had just abandoned. She did not say another word. She just pressed her back against the metal and waited for the explosion. "Let me show you how to do your job," he muttered, snatching the computer mouse from her desk with unnecessary force. He glared at the screen, fully prepared to read my negative balance out loud. He wanted to savor the moment. He wanted to project the number 0 so loudly that my father would nod in approval and my sister would laugh. He wanted to make me feel the full weight of my supposed inadequacy. He planted both of his hands on the desk, leaning in to stare at the high-resolution monitor. I stood perfectly still on the other side of the glass, watching the exact moment his entire reality fractured. It happened in excruciating slow motion. The smug, condescending smirk that had been plastered across his face for the last 5 years melted away like wax near an open flame. All the blood drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. His arrogant, rigid posture collapsed as if an invisible weight had just been dropped directly onto his shoulders. He leaned closer to the screen, his nose almost touching the glass. He tapped the monitor with a shaking index finger, leaving a smudge on the pristine surface. He clicked the mouse, highlighting the balance field. He slammed the refresh key. He hit it again and again, the plastic key clattering frantically under his desperate fingers. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision, hoping that the system was simply displaying a rendering error. The numbers did not change. They sat there, glaring back at him, 10 digits long, commas placed perfectly across the screen. $2 billion. It was a number so incomprehensibly large that it did not register as money to him at first. It registered as a lethal threat. Preston started to hyperventilate. His chest heaved erratically, pulling tight against the buttons of his vest. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The air in his lungs seemed to have evaporated. He gripped the edge of the desk so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. The man who had just proudly announced that his premium bank did not serve beggars was now staring at a net worth that eclipsed the total liquid assets of his entire regional branch. If I executed the wire transfer I had just requested, the branch would instantly fail. He would be completely ruined. From the other side of the counter, my sister Jasmine let out a loud theatrical sigh, completely blind to the catastrophe unfolding 10 feet away. She crossed her arms and tapped her designer heel against the marble floor, the sharp clacking sound echoing in the quiet lobby. "What is the holdup, Preston?" she demanded, her tone laced with deep, unbearable impatience. "Just give her the $50 and tell security to escort her out. We are wasting time. My champagne is getting warm at the country club, and I want to go celebrate my new house. I cannot stand in this lobby all day looking at her depressing outfit. It is actually ruining my mood." My mother Vivian nodded in agreement, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "Honestly, Chloe," she sneered, shaking her head, "you always have to make everything so exceedingly difficult. Even getting rejected takes you twice as long as a normal person. Stop wasting your brother-in-law's time. He has important clients to deal with." My father DeAndre chimed in, his deep voice booming with authority. "Preston, just override the system and give her the cash. We have a celebration to get to. We are done here." Preston could not answer them. He could not even turn his head to acknowledge his wife or his wealthy in-laws. He was completely paralyzed, trapped in a state of absolute silent terror. He knew banking regulations. He knew exactly what kind of clients qualified for those solid black titanium cards. They were not just wealthy, they were market makers. They were the people who could buy and sell his entire corporate hierarchy before breakfast. And he had just ordered his junior teller to cut her card up in front of an audience. The dead silence behind the counter was suddenly broken by a sound that absolutely did not belong in a premium financial institution. It was the sound of heavy, frantic footsteps. Someone was running. The rapid, desperate thud of leather soles echoed loudly down the grand marble staircase that connected the executive suites to the main lobby floor. Every head in the room turned to look. The wealthy clients in the waiting area lowered their newspapers. The tellers stopped typing. Even my parents turned around, their expressions twisting into masks of confusion. It was Arthur Sterling, the regional director of Prestige Trust Bank. Arthur was a man who commanded absolute authority in the financial sector. He was Preston's ultimate boss, the man who held the power to make or break careers with a single signature on a piece of paper. Arthur was known for his icy demeanor and his slow, calculating movements. He never ran, he glided. But today, Arthur Sterling was sprinting. He took the last 3 marble steps in a single reckless leap, his usually immaculate silver hair disheveled and falling across his forehead. He was sweating profusely through his expensive tailored suit, his chest heaving violently from the exertion. He bypassed the velvet ropes, knocking one over without even looking back. He ignored the bewildered clients sitting in the waiting area. He completely disregarded my parents and Jasmine, who instinctively parted out of his way like startled sheep as he barreled through the lobby. Arthur did not look at my father. He did not look at Jasmine's newly signed mortgage documents. He did not even look at Preston, who was still gasping for air and clinging to the desk behind the teller window. Instead, the regional director came to a screeching halt directly in front of me. The most powerful man in the building planted his feet, took a shaky breath, and bowed his head slightly in a gesture of deep, unmistakable submission. Arthur Sterling kept his head bowed for a long, heavy second before looking up at me. His face was flushed red with panic, and he was completely ignoring the stunned bank employees and the wealthy clients staring at him. He completely ignored Preston, who was still leaning against the teller counter, gasping for breath like a stranded fish. "Ms. Washington," Arthur said, his voice trembling with a level of deference I had never heard directed at me in my entire life. "Please let me personally apologize for this unacceptable delay. There has been a catastrophic miscommunication on our floor. If you could just step into the VIP executive suite with me, we can discuss this immediately and rectify whatever has upset you." Preston finally managed to rip his gaze away from the computer monitor. He stared at his boss in total bewilderment. His brain simply could not process the hierarchy reversal happening right in front of his eyes. "Arthur, what are you doing?" Preston stammered, wiping a bead of cold sweat from his forehead. "She is not a VIP. She is just my broke sister-in-law. She is a college dropout who lives in a studio apartment. There is a glitch in the mainframe. Her card is a fake." Arthur whipped his head around, his eyes blazing with a furious, lethal intensity that made my father physically step back. "Shut your mouth, Preston!" Arthur roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted marble ceiling. "Ms. Washington moving $2 billion without a 30-day notice will trigger an immediate liquidity crisis for this entire regional branch. It will drain our federal reserves and put us in direct violation of state banking regulations. Do you understand what you have just done? You just insulted the sole founder and CEO of OraPay. You just ordered security on the largest single private asset holder in this entire institution." The lobby was instantly paralyzed. Absolute dead silence fell over the massive room. The faint clicking of computer keyboards ceased. The soft hum of the air conditioning suddenly sounded like a jet engine. Jasmine lost her grip on her custom designer handbag. The heavy leather slipped from her manicured fingers and hit the solid marble floor with a loud, sharp thud. The gold clasp snapped open, spilling her perfectly organized life across the stone. Her expensive lipsticks, car keys, and compact mirrors rolled away, but she did not even blink or make a move to retrieve them. Her jaw went completely slack. My father DeAndre stood frozen, his mouth hanging open in a very uncharacteristic display of shock. His pristine bespoke blazer suddenly looked incredibly cheap compared to the staggering world-shifting wealth that Arthur had just announced to the room. My mother Vivian clutched her cashmere wrap tightly against her throat. Her eyes darted frantically between my faded Howard University hoodie and the sweating regional director as her mind aggressively short-circuited. She was trying to comprehend how the daughter she had just labeled a beggar could possess enough capital to buy and sell the very ground we were standing on. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice or demand a frantic apology from any of them. I remained perfectly still, letting the crushing weight of reality suffocate their delusions. A terrified junior associate rushed out from a back office carrying a silver tray with a glass of sparkling water. His hands were shaking so badly, the ice clinked violently against the crystal. I calmly accepted the glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip, relishing the cold, crisp water as I watched my family's entire social hierarchy disintegrate. Led the way. Arthur, I said smoothly, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of emotion. Let us discuss how quickly you can empty this branch of my assets. I turned my back on my family and walked toward the heavy frosted glass doors of the VIP suite. The heavy silence of the room seemed to part for me, but they did not stay paralyzed in the lobby for long. The sheer magnitude of the money, the realization of what they had just witnessed, snapped them out of their shock and triggered pure panic. They scrambled after me, abandoning all sense of decorum or premium bank protocol. Preston stumbled out from behind the teller counter, his face flushed and his tie askew. My parents and sister chased right behind him, pushing past the velvet ropes and ignoring the security guards who were too stunned to intervene. We entered the expansive VIP suite with its rich mahogany paneled walls and plush leather seating. The air in the room felt thick and expensive, but I claimed the space instantly. I sat down at the head of the long, polished conference table, crossing my legs and setting my sparkling water on a heavy slate coaster. Preston burst into the room looking like a man facing a firing squad. He gripped the edge of the conference table, his knuckles turning stark white as he leaned forward. He was frantic, shaking his head in aggressive denial. It is a mistake, he pleaded, looking desperately at Arthur and entirely refusing to look at me. She cannot have $2 billion. She lives in a rundown apartment in the worst part of the city. She is a failure, Arthur. She sells some little software app out of her trunk. It is a scam. It has to be a scam. He was clinging to the narrative they had forced on me for years. He could not comprehend that while they were taking out massive loans to fund luxury vacations and leasing cars they could barely afford, I was living in a cheap apartment, funneling every single cent I earned into building my platform's infrastructure and securing global patents. While they were buying status, I was quietly buying power. Arthur looked at Preston with a mixture of professional pity and absolute disgust. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavily embossed folder. He slammed it down onto the polished mahogany table right in front of Preston. The loud smack made Jasmine flinch. "Read it yourself," Arthur commanded, his voice dropping to a cold, unforgiving register. There is no glitch. The silence in the room became absolute. Jasmine stared at me, her perfectly glossed lips parted slightly as her brain desperately tried to translate my words into a language she could comprehend. "Bought the holding firm," she repeated, her voice completely hollow. "Chloe, that makes absolutely no sense. You cannot just buy Vanguard Estates. They own half the luxury developments in the state." I smiled, leaning back into the rich leather chair. "I did not buy them directly, Jasmine. Aura Pay acquired them through a subsidiary early this morning. While you were picking out imported Italian marble for your kitchen counters, I was finalizing a hostile takeover of the firm, holding the paper on your little dream home. You see, you financed that house with a variable interest rate balloon mortgage, assuming Preston would always be sitting in this office to protect your rates and waive your fees." Preston let out a pathetic whimpering sound from the floor. He knew exactly what a variable rate meant when the person holding the contract actively despised you. "For 5 years I sat in a studio apartment with peeling paint and a radiator that barely worked," I continued, my voice steady and unforgiving. "Every Sunday dinner you all mocked me. DeAndre called me a failure because I did not want to climb a corporate ladder. Vivian told her country club friends I was going through a delusional phase. You all thought I was building some trivial mobile game to pass the time. I was building the digital infrastructure that now processes 40% of all peer-to-peer transactions in North America. Oripay was operating in stealth mode. We were a decacorn at $10 billion valuation before we even rang the opening bell on Wall Street yesterday. Arthur Sterling stood by the door watching the execution with silent professional awe. He motioned to the hallway and two large security guards stepped into the VIP suite. "Remove Mr. Blackwood from the premises," Arthur commanded, his voice entirely devoid of sympathy. "His employment is terminated. Cancel his keycard, freeze his access tokens, and ensure he leaves with nothing but the coat on his back." Preston scrambled backward on the carpet, crying and reaching out for my sister. "Jasmine, do something," he begged, his face smeared with tears and sweat. "Tell her to stop. Please tell her we are family." But Jasmine physically recoiled from him. The moment Preston lost his title, he lost his entire value to her. She stepped away, pulling her pristine white pantsuit out of his reach, as the guards grabbed him by the armpits and hauled him violently out of the room. His pathetic sobs faded down the marble hallway, leaving a heavy, chilling quiet in his wake. Vivian dropped her sweet, supportive mother act instantly. Her face flushed a furious, mottled red, her true colors bleeding through the cashmere facade. "You spiteful little brat," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You orchestrated this entire spectacle just to humiliate us. You let us think you were ruined. You are going to sign that deed over to your sister right now. We are your family. We raised you. We clothed you." I raised an eyebrow, taking another sip of sparkling water. "I thought strong black women did not take handouts, Mother. That was your exact phrasing in the lobby 10 minutes ago. Or does that rigid cultural standard only apply to the daughter you deemed worthless?" Jasmine slammed her hands on the mahogany table, her eyes wild with a mixture of terror and fury. "You owe me, Chloe," she screamed, completely abandoning her refined socialite persona. "I am your older sister. I did everything right. I went to the right schools. I married the right man. You do not get to just walk in here and take my life." "I took nothing from you, Jasmine," I replied, my tone turning to ice. "You built your entire life on a mountain of debt and arrogance. I just happened to be the one who bought the mountain." DeAndre slammed his fist onto the table, making the crystal water pitchers rattle violently. "Enough of this nonsense," he roared, his chest puffed out, his eyes bulging with a terrifying patriarchal rage. He was a man who solved every problem with pure intimidation, and he was defaulting to his only weapon. "You listen to me, Chloe," he barked, leaning over the table, trying to use his sheer physical presence to force me into submission. "You lived under my roof. You used the internet and the electricity I paid for to write those first lines of code. By all legal rights, my logistics company is entitled to a founding stake in your enterprise. You are going to transfer 20% of those shares to me right now, or I will tie you up in litigation for the next 10 years. I will drain your assets and bankrupt you before you even get comfortable." He stood there breathing heavily, expecting me to cower just like I did when I was a teenager. He expected the old Chloe to apologize and hand over the keys to the kingdom just to keep the peace. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with the man who had terrorized my childhood and belittled my every achievement. Instead, I calmly opened my small leather clutch and pulled out a single neatly folded document. I smoothed it out and slid it across the polished mahogany table toward him. "You cannot bankrupt me, DeAndre," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "But I can certainly bankrupt you." He looked down at the paper and then back at me, his brow furrowing in confusion. "I told you Vanguard Estates owns the paper on Jasmine's house." I continued, leaning forward so he could hear every single syllable clearly. "What I did not tell you is that Vanguard also owns the commercial land leases for all 7 of your logistics warehouses. And as the new owner, I have decided not to renew your leases at the end of the month. You have exactly 30 days to move your entire fleet off my property." Preston's hands shook violently as he peeled open the heavy embossed cover of the portfolio summary. His eyes darted frantically across the crisp white pages, scanning the official bank seals and the verified asset columns. The numbers were absolute. They were undeniable. The document detailed a labyrinth of diversified investments, municipal bonds, offshore holding accounts, and the crowning jewel of it all, an overwhelming majority stake in Oripay. The air in the VIP suite grew thin. Preston dropped the folder as if the paper had physically burned his fingers. His entire future evaporated before his eyes. The upcoming promotion to regional vice president, the premium bonuses, the untouchable status he paraded around the country club, it was all gone. Without my assets sitting quietly in his branch, his liquidity ratios would crash. The federal regulators would descend like vultures, and he would be blacklisted from the financial sector for the rest of his life. He collapsed entirely, letting his knees hit the thick Persian rug. He ignored Arthur Sterling standing rigidly nearby and crawled slightly toward my chair. "Chloe, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "I am so sorry. I was just stressed. The new house, the mortgage, the pressure, it made me act out of character. You know me, Chloe. We are family. You cannot transfer those funds. If you pull that capital today, they will not just fire me. They will investigate me. I will lose everything. Please just leave the accounts where they are." I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. The man who had sneered at my faded hoodie and called me a vagrant 10 minutes ago was now kneeling at my feet, drowning in his own manufactured ruin. I did not offer him a single word of comfort. Seeing Preston completely broken and entirely useless, my mother made her move. Vivian Washington was a survivor of the social elite, and she possessed an uncanny ability to read the power dynamics in any room. The moment she registered the verified $2 billion figure on the table, her entire demeanor shifted. It was a terrifying psychological pivot. The toxic sneer that had permanently etched itself onto her face vanished. Her rigid shoulders relaxed. She physically stepped around Preston as if he were a discarded piece of trash on the sidewalk and moved toward me with a sickeningly sweet smile. "Oh, my brilliant girl," she cooed, her voice dripping with a honeyed warmth that made my skin crawl. She clasped her hands together, her diamond rings catching the soft lighting of the suite. I sat back in the heavy leather executive chair watching her performance. "I knew it," she continued, projecting an aura of immense maternal pride. "I always knew you had this fire inside you, Chloe. Everyone thought I was being too harsh on you all these years, but I knew exactly what I was doing. I saw your potential when no one else did. My tough love is what pushed you to greatness. If I had coddled you like other mothers, you never would have built this incredible empire. You needed a villain to fight against, and I played that role so you could succeed." She reached out, attempting to place her manicured hand over mine. I smoothly pulled my hand away, reaching for my glass of sparkling water instead. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she seamlessly recovered her faux affection. "But really, sweetheart," she sighed, shaking her head in mock disappointment, "hiding this immense wealth from your own blood is a little hurtful. We are your family, we have supported you, and seeing as you let your poor sister stress over her finances while you were sitting on billions, the absolute least you can do is fix this little mess today." Jasmine immediately snapped out of her paralyzed shock. The mention of money acted like smelling salts. She wiped the smeared mascara from under her eyes and stepped forward, leaving her ruined husband kneeling on the floor. "Mom is right, Chloe," Jasmine demanded, her voice regaining its familiar entitled edge. "You deliberately let us look stupid. You stood there and let me stress about a $3 million mortgage while you have more money than God. You owe us for putting us through this emotional distress. If you just pay off the new house right now and handle Preston's severance situation, we can put all this behind us. We can be a real family again." Jasmine nodded eagerly at her own twisted logic, entirely convinced that my bank account was her personal compensation fund. "Just wire the $3 million to my account," she instructed, waving her hand dismissively. "And maybe add a little extra for the trauma you caused today." I looked at my mother standing there with her toxic, calculated sweetness. I looked at my sister demanding a multi-million-dollar payout as an apology for her own cruelty. I looked at my father, who was still staring at the portfolio summary, in stunned silence, realizing his entire patriarchal authority had just been rendered obsolete. They truly believed they could rewrite history in 5 minutes. They believed their sheer audacity could bridge the massive canyon they had dug between us over 35 years. I brought the crystal glass to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip of the sparkling water. The cool liquid felt refreshing against the heated tension of the room. I set the glass back down on the slate coaster, the soft clink echoing clearly in the quiet suite. "I do not need to pay off your mortgage, Mother," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly level. Jasmine scowled, crossing her arms over her chest. "What do you mean you do not need to? You have $2 billion. It is literally pocket change for you, Chloe. Stop being so greedy and just write the check." I locked eyes with my sister, watching the entitlement flare in her expression. "I do not need to write a check to pay off your house, Jasmine," I clarified, leaning forward slightly so my words would land with absolute precision. "Because I already bought the commercial real estate holding firm that owns it." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. "I finalized the acquisition of Vanguard Estates at 8 o'clock this morning." I continued, my tone dropping to a chilling calm. "I own the land, I own the development rights, and I own the paper for that $3 million mortgage you just signed." Jasmine stopped breathing. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror as the reality of her situation finally crashed down upon her. She was not just speaking to her estranged sister. She was speaking to her landlord, her financier, and her ultimate creditor. I stood up from the leather chair, smoothing the front of my hoodie. I did not wait for their protests. I did not wait for their apologies or their tears. I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy frosted glass doors, opening them with a firm push. I walked out into the busy banking lobby, leaving them trapped inside the VIP suite, suffocating in the profound, absolute silence of their own ruin. 3 days passed. 72 hours for the harsh, unyielding reality of Vanguard Estates and Aura Pay to fully settle into the Washington family ecosystem. By Sunday morning, the mandatory summons arrived exactly as I had anticipated. A text from Aunt Valerie reading simply, "Sunday cookout at 2. Do not be late." It was the exact same format they had used for decades to summon the family scapegoat for her weekly dose of public humiliation. Aunt Valerie's Sunday cookouts were never merely social gatherings. They were judicial hearings masked by potato salad and grilled chicken. They were arenas where achievements were measured, compared, and brutally judged. They fully expected me to arrive in my 10-year-old faded sedan. They expected me to walk up the cracked concrete driveway, wearing my usual oversized sweater, carrying a store-bought dessert, and preparing to beg for their forgiveness. They believed that despite the $2 billion revelation, the fundamental family dynamics remained unchanged. They thought I would crumble under the combined pressure of the extended family network. They thought the sheer weight of tradition would force me back into my designated place at the bottom of the hierarchy. They were fundamentally incorrect. At exactly 2 o'clock, the deep, resonant purr of a V12 engine cut through the quiet suburban atmosphere of Aunt Valerie's neighborhood. A custom, midnight blue Mercedes Maybach S680 glided smoothly against the curb. The vehicle was a masterclass in understated dominance, its polished chrome catching the harsh afternoon sun. The tinted windows hid the passenger cabin, completely creating an aura of impenetrable mystery. The loud, overlapping conversations on Aunt Valerie's sprawling front lawn ceased instantly. The usual clinking of beer bottles and the boisterous laughter died in the throats of my aunts, uncles, and cousins. The upbeat music playing from the outdoor speakers suddenly seemed inappropriately loud against the deafening silence of the crowd. My chauffeur, Marcus, stepped out of the driver's seat. He was a mountain of a man, impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit. He walked around the rear of the Maybach with deliberate military precision and opened the heavy armored door for me. I stepped out into the humid afternoon air. I did not wear an oversized sweater. I wore a custom-tailored emerald green silk suit that moved like liquid glass, reflecting the sunlight with every calculated step. My hair was styled flawlessly. A single diamond tennis bracelet rested against my wrist, a quiet nod to the extreme wealth they had spent a lifetime telling me I would never achieve. I adjusted my lapel and looked across the manicured lawn. The silence was absolute. Every single eye was locked onto me. The air was thick with the rich, smoky scent of mesquite barbecue and roasting meats, but it was entirely overpowered by a much stronger stench. The stench of desperate, suffocating greed. My extended family was positioned across the patio, not like a gathering of loved ones, but like a coordinated ambush. They stood in tight clusters, whispering urgently to one another, their eyes darting from the Maybach to my silk suit and back again. Aunt Valerie stood frozen by the grill, holding a pair of stainless steel tongs, perfectly still in midair. Uncle Marcus dropped his cigar into the grass without noticing the glowing ember burning into the lawn. They had all heard the rumors over the last 3 days. The whispers of the bank incident had spread through the family telephone tree like wildfire. They knew about the hostile takeover of Vanguard Estates. They knew about the decacorn valuation of Orapay. But seeing the physical manifestation of that power rolling up to their curb completely paralyzed them. They were staring at a ghost who had returned as a god. I walked up the driveway, my heels clicking a steady, commanding rhythm against the concrete. I did not shrink under their collective gaze. I did not lower my head. I walked with the posture of a woman who owned the ground she stepped on. Jasmine was standing near the patio furniture. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, a stark contrast to her usually flawless appearance. She looked at the Maybach and then at me, her face twisting with a toxic blend of envy and pure, unadulterated panic. Preston was nowhere to be seen. He had likely been banished to the background, a casualty of his own lost status, unable to show his face after losing his vice president title in such a spectacular public fashion. Vivian stood beside Jasmine, clutching a plastic cup of iced tea so tightly the sides were buckling under her grip. She forced a smile onto her face, a rigid, terrifying grimace that barely concealed the predatory calculation behind her eyes. She stepped forward, opening her arms, as if preparing to embrace the daughter she had publicly disowned less than a week ago. "Chloe, darling," she began, her voice loud enough for the entire patio to hear, projecting an image of the perfect, loving mother. "We are so glad you came home. We have so much to celebrate today." I did not stop walking. I did not acknowledge her open arms. I walked straight past my mother, leaving her grasping at empty air. I was not there to play the role of the prodigal daughter returning to the fold. I was there to finish what they started. My target was standing at the far end of the wooden patio deck, DeAndre Washington, my father. He was leaning against the heavy oak picnic table, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His face was a mask of cold, unyielding fury. The 30 days' notice I had served him regarding his commercial warehouse leases had clearly devastated his logistics operations. He looked cornered, dangerous, and utterly determined to assert his patriarchal dominance one last time. He genuinely believed he could bully a billionaire the same way he bullied a struggling college student. As I approached the patio, he pushed himself off the table, deliberately stepping forward to block my path to the seating area. He did not offer a greeting. He did not offer a plate of barbecue or a drink. He stared down at me, attempting to use his physical height and broad shoulders to intimidate me, just as he had done for 35 years. But I was no longer a terrified teenager, and he was no longer the undisputed king of the Washington family. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a thick, bound stack of premium legal paper. The crisp white pages with their blue embossed covers starkly contrasted with the casual outdoor setting. He slammed the document down onto the wooden picnic table, sliding it aggressively across the surface until it stopped mere inches from my hands. "Sign it, Chloe," he ordered, his voice a low, rumbling growl designed to carry absolute, unquestionable authority over the silent crowd. I looked down at the document and then back up at his furious eyes. "What is this, DeAndre?" I asked, my tone perfectly conversational, entirely unbothered by his aggressive posturing. "It is a deed of transfer," he stated plainly, tapping the cover page with a heavy index finger. "It transfers the Vanguard Estates holdings back into a family trust, a trust that I manage. It also grants me a 20% founding stake in Orapay as compensation for the resources you utilized while living under my roof. You are going to sign it right now in front of everyone. You will restore the hierarchy of this family, or I will make sure you never have a moment of peace in this city again." I picked up the thick stack of premium legal paper, feeling the heavy, textured cardstock between my fingers. The scent of mesquite smoke from the grill mingled with the sterile metallic smell of fresh ink. I flipped open the blue embossed cover page, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon printed in crisp, black type. It was titled, "The Washington Family Revocable Trust." My gaze dropped directly to the primary stipulations outlined in the second paragraph. They were demanding an immediate, irrevocable transfer of exactly 50% of my total net worth. The clause specifically targeted all liquid capital real estate holdings and vested shares in Orapay. But the true absolute audacity lay in the governance section. The designated managing trustees granted full discretionary power over the entire multi-billion-dollar fund were none other than Preston and Jasmine Blackwood. I looked up from the document, letting the sheer breathless delusion of their demand wash over me. Preston, the man who had just been publicly fired for severe regulatory violations and spectacular incompetence, was being positioned to manage half of a $10 billion financial empire. Jasmine, who was currently drowning in a $3 million mortgage she could no longer afford, was demanding the master keys to my vault. They had spent my entire life treating me like a disease, and now they wanted to siphon my lifeblood to fund their illusions of grandeur. DeAndre slammed his hand flat against the wooden picnic table, rattling the plastic cups and paper plates nearby. He stepped closer, using his towering frame to cast a heavy shadow over me. He was sweating, his jaw clenched tight as he prepared to weaponize the very culture and community he claimed to protect. "As a successful Black woman, it is your duty to lift up your family," he rumbled, his baritone voice dripping with a manufactured toxic righteousness. "We gave you life. We sacrificed our own retirements to put Jasmine through law school so this family could have a real legacy." He pointed a thick, accusing finger at my chest, his eyes burning with a desperate, greedy intensity that made him look completely unhinged. "You owe us for all the times we put up with your rebellious phases. You owe us for keeping a roof over your head while you locked yourself in your room playing on computers instead of contributing to this household. We built the foundation you are standing on. Sign it." The extended family stood completely frozen on the patio. Aunts, uncles, and cousins watched in stunned silence as the patriarch of the Washington family actively attempted to extort his own daughter in broad daylight. No one stepped forward to defend me. Uncle Marcus simply took another drag of his cigar, looking away. Aunt Valerie pretended to be intensely focused on flipping a rack of ribs. They were entirely complicit, silently hoping that if DeAndre successfully bullied me into signing away half my fortune, a few $1 million might trickle down to them. Vivian stood slightly behind my father, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was nodding in silent, fervent approval. She had clearly helped draft this legal ambush, trading whatever maternal instincts she had left for the promise of an unlimited platinum credit card. She looked at me with cold, calculating eyes, fully expecting me to cave to the immense pressure of a public family shakedown. Jasmine sensed the heavy silence and decided to step directly into the fray. She strutted forward, her designer heels clicking sharply against the wooden deck boards. She bypassed our parents and stopped right beside the picnic table, planting her feet firmly. The raw panic I had seen in her eyes 3 days ago inside the bank suite was completely gone. In its place was a sickening, unearned arrogance. She genuinely believed this ambush was going to work. She believed they had finally cornered me. She looked me up and down, her eyes raking over my tailored emerald silk suit with intense, visible jealousy. She crossed her arms defensively over her chest, tilting her chin up in a classic display of unearned superiority. "Do not be selfish, Chloe," she demanded, her voice shrill and loud enough for every single relative on the lawn to hear clearly. "You would not even have that money if we had not taught you how to survive." I looked at Jasmine standing there with her arms crossed, demanding I surrender half of my life's work as compensation for a childhood of emotional torment. I looked at the thick stack of premium legal paper sitting between us, the physical manifestation of their boundless, terrifying entitlement. They genuinely believed that citing family duty and weaponizing cultural expectations would magically erase decades of targeted abuse. They believed that because I had remained silent for so long, I was weak enough to fold under the pressure of a public ambush. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a tearful monologue about fairness, or launch into a defensive rant about how hard I had worked to build Oripe from a cramped studio apartment. Explanations were for people seeking validation, and I had completely stopped seeking theirs the moment I walked out of that bank suite 3 days ago. Instead, I reached out and placed my fingertips gently against the edge of the blue embossed cover of the Washington Family Trust contract. With a slow, deliberate, and entirely unbothered motion, I pushed the 200-page document off the edge of the picnic table. It fell with a heavy, satisfying thud. The thick binding slammed against the patio stones before sliding off the edge and spilling directly into the dirt. The afternoon breeze immediately caught the loose pages, scattering DeAndre's meticulously drafted extortion demands across the manicured lawn like common, discarded trash. The collective gasp from the extended family echoed across the patio. Aunt Valerie dropped her tongs onto the grill with a loud clatter. Uncle Marcus froze his cigar halfway to his mouth. The entire hierarchy of the Washington family was built on absolute, unquestioning obedience to DeAndre. No one defied him. No one dismissed a direct order on his own property. Watching his legal mandate get casually shoved into the dirt shattered the fundamental reality they all operated under. DeAndre's face turned a dangerous mottled shade of crimson. The veins in his thick neck bulged against the collar of his polo shirt. He stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides, his chest heaving as he prepared to unleash a tirade of patriarchal fury that had kept this family terrified and compliant for 35 years. "You pick that up right now," he bellowed, his baritone voice shaking the patio furniture. "You are going to show some respect to the blood that created you. You do not disrespect this family in my house." I met his furious gaze with absolute chilling indifference. "I did not come here for the potato salad," I said, my voice cutting through the thick, humid air with surgical precision. "And I certainly did not come here to be extorted by people who called me a beggar 3 days ago." Jasmine stumbled backward, her designer heels catching awkwardly on the stone pavers. Her arrogant posture vanished instantly, replaced by the same raw, panicked realization she had displayed when she discovered I owned her mortgage. She looked down at the scattered contract in the grass, and then back up at my emerald silk suit. "What are you doing, Chloe?" she stammered, her voice losing all its previous authority. "You cannot just ignore a legal mandate. Dad had lawyers draft that. You owe us." I ignored her entirely. I unclasped my suit jacket and reached into the sleek leather portfolio bag my chauffeur Marcus had silently handed me upon arrival. I bypassed the pens and the physical folders and pulled out a sleek matte black iPad Pro. DeAndre had always been obsessed with projecting extreme wealth and dominance, culminating in the massive 85-inch outdoor television mounted above the custom stone fireplace on the patio. It was his prized possession, the focal point of every family gathering, usually reserved for Sunday football games, and showcasing his superior lifestyle to the neighbors. Taking control of that screen meant taking control of his absolute domain. I swiped across my screen, tapping the mirroring icon. A sharp electronic chime echoed from the premium outdoor surround sound speakers. The massive television behind DeAndre instantly flickered to life, shifting from a dormant black screen to a crisp, high-definition display of my iPad interface. The sudden shift in lighting and sound made several relatives physically jump. Vivian finally realized that the power dynamic had completely, irreversibly shifted. The calculated maternal sweetness evaporated, leaving behind a frantic, desperate woman trying to mitigate a disaster. She stepped forward, attempting to use her body to block the massive screen, a completely futile gesture. "Chloe, sweetheart, let us not do this out here," she pleaded, her voice tight and breathless. "This is private family business. We do not need to involve everyone in our personal financial discussions. We can go inside the house and sit down in your father's office like rational adults. We can negotiate the terms of the trust. I looked at my mother, admiring the sheer breathtaking hypocrisy of her request. You made this public business the moment you tried to execute a coordinated shakedown in front of 30 relatives, I replied, my eyes sweeping across the crowd of silent, watchful aunts, uncles, and cousins. You invited them here to watch me break. You wanted an audience to witness my submission so you could secure your legacy. Now you have an audience. I looked dead into DeAndre's furious eyes, holding the iPad with terrifying calm. He stood there paralyzed, realizing that his physical intimidation tactics were entirely useless against a woman who held total financial leverage over his life. You brought your documents, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the quiet hum of the patio. You laid out your extortion demands. Now it is time I deliver mine. I pressed play. The massive 85-inch screen mounted above the stone fireplace remained pitch black, but the premium outdoor surround sound speakers instantly vibrated to life. A sharp electronic click echoed across the patio, cutting through the thick, humid air. Then a voice boomed across the manicured lawn. A male voice. It was high-pitched, nervous, and unmistakably Preston. I am telling you, Jasmine, the bank will not catch it. Preston's recorded voice practically vibrated with anxiety. As a branch manager, I can push the HELOC paperwork through the automated underwriting system. We just need her signature on the deed transfer. Jasmine's voice came next, sharp, dismissive, and dripping with her usual arrogance. So forge it, Preston. She is just a nobody living in a studio apartment. She does not even know how property taxes work. Grandma was out of her mind leaving that estate to her anyway. The absolute silence on the patio shattered. Aunt Valerie dropped her large plastic cup of iced tea. It hit the concrete pavers with a loud, wet smack, splashing brown liquid and ice cubes all over her expensive sandals. She did not even look down. Uncle Marcus choked on his cigar smoke, entering a violent coughing fit as he stared at the television speakers in pure disbelief. Jasmine physically recoiled, her perfectly tanned face drained of all color, shifting to a sickly, chalky white in a matter of seconds. She lunged toward the fireplace, frantically clawing at the soundbar beneath the television, trying to find a power button or yank a cord. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, her voice cracking wildly. "That is fake. That is artificially generated. She is trying to frame us." I did not touch the iPad. I let the high-definition audio continue to roll across the paralyzed crowd. If the federal board audits my approvals and sees I notarized a forged signature on a $2 million remortgage. Preston's recorded voice trailed off, sounding terrified. "Stop being a coward!" Jasmine's voice snapped back, echoing aggressively through the speakers. "That house should have been mine." So what if Chloe changed a few bedpans and bought Grandma's heart medication? I am the oldest. I have a social standing to maintain. We need that liquid cash for the Vanguard down payment. Just trace her signature from the old lease agreements in Dad's office. The extended family gasped collectively. A low, horrified murmur rippled through the crowd of aunts, uncles, and cousins. The very same people who had stood by ready to watch DeAndre extort me were now staring at their golden child in absolute revulsion. "You thought Grandma was crazy for leaving her home to me," I said, my voice slicing through the murmurs with surgical precision. I stepped away from the picnic table, walking slowly toward my sister. "You thought it was an insult to your precious social hierarchy. But Grandma knew exactly who you were, Jasmine. She spent the last 3 years of her life bedridden. She watched you and Mother parade around at charity galas, acting like pillars of the community, while I was the one washing her clothes, paying for her treatments, and holding her hand while she cried. Grandma left me that house to protect it from you." Jasmine backed up against the brick masonry of the fireplace, breathing in short, terrified gasps. Her eyes darted wildly around the patio, looking for a single sympathetic face. She found none. DeAndre stood entirely frozen by the picnic table. His heavy fists were still clenched, but his commanding posture was rapidly crumbling. His golden daughter, the brilliant lawyer, the absolute pride of the Washington family, was caught on tape, plotting felony wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Vivian grabbed DeAndre's arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into his sleeve. "DeAndre, do something," she hissed, panicked and desperate. "Make her stop the recording. This will ruin us." But the audio was not finished. What if Chloe finds out Preston's voice asked on the tape? She pays the property taxes. She will see the lien. Jasmine's recorded laughter filled the patio, a cruel, malicious sound that made several relatives physically cringe. Chloe is a failure, Preston. By the time she notices the new mortgage on the property, we will have already flipped the cash into the Vanguard house. If she tries to sue us, Dad will just crush her with his corporate lawyers. He hates her anyway. He will never let her drag my name into court. The recording clicked off, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. DeAndre's jaw slacked. The final sentence had hit him like a physical blow to the chest. Jasmine had just admitted on tape that she viewed her father not as a respected patriarch, but as a convenient attack dog to cover up her federal crimes. I turned my gaze back to DeAndre, looking at the scattered pages of his extortion contract blowing gently across the grass. "You brought an extortion document to a family barbecue, DeAndre," I said, my tone perfectly level, but laced with venom. "You stood there and demanded 50% of my assets to protect a daughter who was actively plotting to forge my name and steal a $2 million estate. A daughter who openly admitted she was using your legal team as a shield for her felonies. You set us up!" Jasmine screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. Her mask of superiority was completely obliterated. "You planted bugs in our house. That is a federal crime. I will have you arrested." I raised an eyebrow, looking at her with genuine pity. "Actually, Jasmine, I own the cybersecurity firm that audited Preston's bank servers last quarter," I clarified, watching the realization dawn on her face. "You used a recorded corporate conference line to plot a felony with your husband while he was sitting at his branch manager desk. Your arrogance was so absolute, you did not even bother to use a secure network. You handed your own confession directly to the bank's compliance department." The document lay perfectly centered on the weathered wood of the picnic table. I did not immediately reach for it. I simply lowered my gaze, allowing my eyes to scan the bold, meticulously typed headings on the first page. It was titled, "The Washington Family Revocable Trust." Paragraph by paragraph, the absolute delusion of their demands revealed itself. This was not a desperate request for a temporary loan. This was not a plea for financial assistance to save DeAndre's rapidly failing logistics company. This was a hostile familial takeover wrapped in legal jargon. The contract clearly stipulated an immediate and irrevocable transfer of exactly 50% of my total verified net worth into this newly formed trust. The clauses specifically targeted my liquid capital, my commercial real estate acquisitions, and most audaciously, half of my vested founder shares in Orapay. But the true breathtaking arrogance of the document was buried in the governance section at the bottom of the second page. I read the names printed in crisp black ink. The designated managing trustees, the individuals granted total discretionary power to distribute, invest, and manage the multi-billion-dollar fund, were Preston and Jasmine Blackwood. I let out a short, quiet breath of dark amusement. The sheer audacity was almost clinical. Preston, the man who had been violently escorted out of his own bank branch by security guards 3 days ago, after I exposed his gross incompetence and severed his career, was being positioned to manage billions of dollars. Jasmine, the woman who had financed a luxury mansion with a balloon mortgage she fundamentally could not comprehend, was demanding the master keys to my digital empire. They had spent my entire life treating me like a disease, and now they wanted to siphon my lifeblood to fund their illusions of grandeur. DeAndre slammed his large hand flat against the table, rattling the plastic cups and paper plates nearby. He leaned heavily over the surface, casting a dark shadow across the patio. His face was inches from mine, his jaw clenched tight as he prepared to weaponize the very culture and community he claimed to protect. He was a man accustomed to blind obedience, and my calm silence was driving him to the edge of violence. "As a successful Black woman, it is your duty to lift up your family," he rumbled, his baritone voice dripping with a manufactured, toxic righteousness. He leaned in closer, the scent of his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of charcoal smoke. He was utilizing the ultimate manipulative tactic, twisting generational loyalty into a tool for financial extortion. "We gave you life," he continued, his voice rising in volume so the entire patio could hear his performance. "We sacrificed our own retirements to put Jasmine through law school so this family could have a real legacy. We built the foundation that allowed you to step out into the world. You did not get to where you are in a vacuum, Chloe. You stood on our shoulders." I stared at him, letting his revisionist history wash over me. He completely omitted the fact that I had paid for my own education through scholarships and working triple shifts. He conveniently forgot that my grandmother had been the only one to offer me a safe harbor. He equated his financial support of Jasmine's vanity degrees with my own grueling, unassisted climb to the top of the financial technology sector. "You owe us for all the times we put up with your rebellious phases," DeAndre barked, pointing a thick, accusing finger directly at my chest. "You owe us for keeping a roof over your head while you locked yourself in your room playing on computers instead of contributing to the social standing of this household. We tolerated your disrespect for years. Now it is time to pay your dues. Sign it." The extended family stood completely frozen on the lawn. Aunts, uncles, and cousins watched in stunned silence as the patriarch of the Washington family actively attempted to extort his own daughter in broad daylight. No one stepped forward to defend me. Uncle Marcus simply took another long drag of his cigar, actively looking away toward the fence line. Aunt Valerie pretended to be intensely focused on wiping down the stainless steel grill. They were entirely complicit in their silence. They were hoping that if DeAndre successfully bullied me into signing away half my fortune, a few $1,000,000 might quietly trickle down to them. They were witnessing a psychological mugging, and they were waiting for their cut of the stolen goods. Vivienne stood slightly behind my father, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was nodding in silent, fervent approval. She had clearly helped draft this legal ambush, trading whatever maternal instincts she had left for the promise of an unlimited platinum credit card. She looked at me with cold, calculating eyes, fully expecting me to cave to the immense pressure of a public family shakedown. She believed the ingrained fear of making a scene would force me to pick up the pen. Jasmine sensed the heavy, suffocating silence and decided to step directly into the fray. Emboldened by her father's aggressive posturing, she strutted forward, her designer heels clicking sharply against the wooden deck boards. She bypassed our parents and stopped right beside the picnic table, planting her feet firmly. The raw panic I had seen in her eyes 3 days ago inside the bank suite was completely gone. In its place was a sickening, unearned arrogance. She genuinely believed this ambush was going to work. She believed they had finally cornered the family scapegoat. She looked me up and down, her eyes raking over my tailored emerald silk suit with intense visible jealousy. She crossed her arms defensively over her chest, tilting her chin up in a classic display of unearned superiority. "Do not be selfish, Chloe," Jasmine demanded, her voice shrill and loud enough for every single relative on the lawn to hear clearly. "You would not even have that money if we had not taught you how to survive." Vivienne snatched her envelope first, her manicured fingers trembling violently as she tore at the heavy paper clasp. She ripped the top open with a jagged tear, pulling out a thick stack of documents bound with a sleek black clip. DeAndre was next, his movements slow and rigid, as if he already sensed the trap closing around him. He slid his thumb under the seal of his envelope and pulled out a matching folio. Jasmine simply shredded hers, her hands shaking so badly she dropped half the pages onto the stone patio before scrambling to her knees to gather them. The documents bore the crisp, embossed logo of Aura Equity Partners. I watched their eyes dart back and forth across the crisp white pages. I watched the initial confusion contort into stark, paralyzing horror. The color drained from DeAndre's face, leaving his skin a sickly gray. His broad chest, which he had puffed out in dominant arrogance just moments ago, suddenly seemed to collapse inward. His hands, the same hands that had slammed against the picnic table in patriarchal rage, began to shake uncontrollably. "You wanted my money to save Jasmine's failing firm and Dad's sinking business?" I asked, my voice cutting through the humid air with the precision of a scalpel. The silence on the patio was absolute. The background noise of the neighborhood faded away. Even the extended family standing on the lawn held their collective breath. I kept my gaze locked on DeAndre, watching his eyes scan the financial summaries of his own ruin. You spent this entire afternoon lecturing me about family legacy and financial duty. I continued my tone, devoid of any sympathy. You stood in front of this entire family and demanded I surrender half my net worth to cover your failures. You tried to shame me for building my own life while you were secretly defaulting on your corporate loans. Your logistics company is bleeding capital, DeAndre. You are 6 months behind on your fleet maintenance payments, and your primary commercial credit line is maxed out. You are completely bankrupt. Vivian let out a choked, whimpering sound. She looked from the papers to DeAndre, her eyes wide with betrayal. You told me the business was expanding. She gasped, her voice shrill and panicked. You told me we were buying the vacation home in Martha's Vineyard. DeAndre could not even look at his wife. He was staring at a specific page in his folio, a notice of immediate debt recall. And you, Jasmine, I said, pivoting to my sister, who was still kneeling on the patio, clutching her documents against her chest like a shield. You strutted around here mocking my choices and demanding my money to maintain your fake socialite lifestyle. Your law firm has not paid its commercial rent in 4 months. You are facing an active eviction notice. You were plotting felony wire fraud with Preston because you are flat broke and entirely desperate. Jasmine shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. This is illegal, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. You cannot look at our private financials. You cannot access this information. You really should have checked who your creditors were, I said, stepping around the picnic table to close the distance between us. When OraPay went public, I established a private equity wing. I watched the realization hit them like a physical blow. The absolute finality of their situation crashed down onto the patio. For years they had treated me as the disposable child, the one they could push around, mock, and extort whenever it suited their needs. They had operated under the delusional assumption that my silence equaled submission. They never once considered that I was silently buying up the very ground they walked on. I stepped closer to them, invading their personal space, the exact same way DeAndre had done to me my entire life. I looked down at my father, a man who was now physically shrinking under the weight of his own destruction. I did not just sell an app, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that commanded total silence. I bought the holding company that owns Preston's bank branch. I bought the high-rise that houses Jasmine's law firm. And I acquired the primary logistics vendor Dad's business relies on to survive. I am literally your boss, your landlord, and your primary debt holder. Aunt Valerie let out a loud gasp from the grill area, dropping her spatula entirely. Uncle Marcus took a slow, heavy step backward, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. The entire extended family, the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had stood by ready to watch me get fleeced, were now witnessing a complete decapitation of the Washington family hierarchy. The king was dead, and I was holding the crown. DeAndre opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The man who had ruled this family through intimidation and volume was completely muted. He looked down at the documents identifying Aura Equity Partners as the sole owner of his outstanding corporate debt. He realized in that exact moment that I had the legal authority to liquidate his entire company by Monday morning. I could strip him of his trucks, his warehouses, and his precious executive title with a single phone call. Vivian attempted to salvage the unsalvageable. She dropped her documents and lunged toward me, her hands outstretched, her face twisted into a mask of desperate, manufactured maternal affection. Chloe, sweetheart, she cried out, trying to grab my forearms. You are our daughter. You are my baby girl. We can fix this. We can work together as a family. We can merge the businesses. We can put you at the head of the table. You do not have to do this to us. I took a sharp step back, refusing to let her touch me. Do not ever call me your sweetheart, I said, my voice echoing off the brick facade of their heavily mortgaged house. You stood right there and smiled while your husband tried to rob me. You nodded along while your golden child plotted to steal the only thing Grandma left me. You wanted me ruined so you could keep playing rich, I turned my attention back to Jasmine, who was still on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. The pristine image she had curated her entire life was shattered. She had no law firm office to return to. She had a husband who was about to be indicted for wire fraud. She had a mortgage she could not pay, and a sister she could no longer bully. "You have 72 hours to vacate the commercial property, Jasmine," I stated, reading the terms of her eviction directly to her face. "If your firm's assets are not removed by Wednesday morning, my property management team will seize them to cover your outstanding rent. And DeAndre, your logistics vendor contract is officially terminated effective immediately. You have until the end of the month to settle your outstanding debt with Aura Equity before we begin seizing your personal assets to cover the corporate deficit." I turned my back on them, picking up my leather portfolio bag from the picnic table. The silence from the extended family was deafening. No one moved, no one spoke. They simply parted like the Red Sea as I walked across the patio and down the steps toward the driveway. They were looking at me, not as the family disappointment, but as the absolute undisputed architect of their reality. The patio remained trapped in a state of absolute paralysis. The scent of charred ribs still hung heavy in the air, a stark domestic contrast to the corporate execution taking place on the grass. My revelation hung over them, an invisible guillotine that had just dropped, severing the Washington family hierarchy at the neck. I watched the realization spread like a virus. It hit Uncle Marcus first. He slowly lowered his unlit cigar, placing it carefully on the edge of the stone fire pit, as if any sudden movement might draw my attention to him. Aunt Valerie took 2 distinct steps backward, retreating into the shadow of the patio awning, trying to physically erase her complicity. They had all come to watch a slaughter, and they were currently standing ankle-deep in the ruin of their patriarch. Preston, however, was reacting differently. While Jasmine sobbed on the ground and DeAndre stared blankly at the financial documents, proving his ruin, Preston was attempting to execute a cowardly strategic retreat. He took a slow, shuffling step backward, putting physical space between himself and my weeping sister. He smoothed the front of his expensive linen shirt, his eyes darting frantically, looking for an exit strategy. "Chloe, you have to understand," he began, his voice cracking slightly. His usual condescending banker persona was completely gone, replaced by the reedy tone of a desperate man. I was just humoring her. "You heard the tape. I told Jasmine the bank would not catch it, but I never actually filed the paperwork. I was trying to talk her down. She was out of her mind with the mortgage payments. I would never have actually signed off on forged documents. You know me, Chloe. I am a professional." I looked at him, letting a cold, sharp smile touch the corners of my mouth. "You are a coward, Preston," I corrected smoothly. "You are a man who stood in a bank suite 3 days ago and threatened to have me removed by security because you thought I was poor. You are a man who just stood silently on this patio while my father demanded half my net worth. And you are a branch manager who openly discussed bypassing automated underwriting systems to commit federal mortgage fraud." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my smartphone. The sleek glass and metal device felt heavy and powerful in my palm. The glare of the afternoon sun caught the screen, flashing a bright reflection directly into Preston's eyes. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice dropping to an anxious whisper. I tapped the screen, unlocking the device and navigating to my contacts. I bypassed the personal numbers and tapped the icon for my legal team. I pressed the call button and immediately engaged the speakerphone. The ringing tone echoed loudly across the silent patio, bouncing off the brick facade of DeAndre's heavily mortgaged mansion. 1 ring, 2 rings. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it could shatter the glass patio table. Arthur Sterling, speaking a crisp, deep voice, announced through the premium speakers. The sound of high-level corporate authority cut through the suburban backyard like a knife. "Mr. Sterling, it is Chloe," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Preston. "Good afternoon, Miss Washington." Mr. Sterling replied, his tone shifting to immediate deferential respect. "How is the family gathering proceeding?" "It is concluding precisely as we anticipated," I answered. Preston's eyes widened. He took another step backward, bumping into a heavy wrought iron patio chair, His hands began to tremble. He raised them palms outward in a silent, desperate plea. I ignored him entirely. "Mr. Sterling, please notify the board at Prestige Trust," I instructed, my voice projecting clearly over the manicured lawn. Based on Preston's recorded admission of attempted mortgage fraud and his documented hostility toward a Tier 1 client, I want him terminated immediately with cause. Strip his pension. Preston let out a strangled gasp. "Chloe, please," he begged, his voice cracking completely. "We have 2 car payments. We have the country club dues. You cannot do this." I did not even blink. "Inform the compliance department that we will be forwarding the audio evidence of his intent to bypass federal underwriting protocols to the banking regulators by end of day," I continued, speaking directly into the phone. The patio erupted into a chorus of panicked whispers. Aunt Valerie clutched her chest. Vivian let out a sharp, terrified wail, pressing her hands over her mouth. Stripping Preston of his pension and reporting him to the federal banking regulators did not just mean he was fired. It meant he would be blacklisted. He would never work in the financial sector again. His entire career was being vaporized in real time. "Understood, Ms. Washington," Mr. Sterling replied, his voice devoid of any hesitation or pity. "I am transmitting the executive override to the board now. The termination protocol will be executed immediately." "Is there anything else?" "That will be all for now. Mr. Sterling," I said, "have a pleasant weekend." I tapped the screen, ending the call. The silence rushed back in, heavier and more suffocating than before. I looked at Preston. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his temple, tracking through his designer stubble. He stood completely frozen, his eyes fixed on the device in my hand, as if it were a loaded weapon. "You have about 60 seconds before your corporate email is locked." "Preston," I said, my voice soft but merciless, "I suggest you refresh your inbox." The countdown began in the minds of everyone present. The quiet hum of the pool pump and the distant chirping of cicadas were the only sounds. Jasmine had stopped sobbing, looking up at her husband with an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. If Preston lost his salary, her facade was completely finished. Preston slowly reached into the pocket of his tailored slacks. His fingers were shaking so violently, he nearly dropped his phone on the stone pavers. He fumbled with the screen, swiping up to unlock it. He stared at the display, his breathing shallow and rapid. 10 seconds passed. 20 seconds. Then the sharp, harsh buzz of an incoming high-priority email vibrated in his hand. The sound was loud enough to be heard across the patio. Preston stared at the notification banner illuminating his screen. He tapped the message. I watched his eyes track back and forth, reading the stark corporate language that outlined his immediate termination, with cause the severing of his benefits and the impending regulatory investigation. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. His mouth opened, but he could not pull enough air into his lungs to form words. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the stone patio with a sharp crack, the screen spider webbing into a dozen fractured pieces. Preston staggered backward, his knees buckling beneath him. He collapsed into a patio chair, clutching his chest with both hands. As he gasped for air, his perfectly curated life entirely dismantled. Preston remained slumped in the heavy wrought iron patio chair, clutching his chest as he gasped for air. The sharp crack of his dropped phone shattering against the stone pavers seemed to finally break the spell of paralysis that had gripped my sister. Jasmine stared at the broken device on the ground and then looked up at me. The reality of what had just transpired finally penetrated her overwhelming arrogance. Her husband's lucrative career, his pension, his industry reputation, and his ability to finance her extravagant lifestyle had just been entirely vaporized in a matter of seconds. The safety net she had relied upon to fund her superiority was completely gone. A guttural primal sound tore its way out of Jasmine's throat. It was not the polished, articulate voice of a high society lawyer, but the raw, feral shriek of a woman watching her kingdom burn to ash. She snapped. Jasmine lunged forward, charging down the wooden steps of the patio toward the edge of the driveway where I stood. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her hands curled into desperate claws. She was fully intending to physically attack me, to tear at my clothes and my face, to inflict whatever physical damage she could to compensate for the absolute financial destruction I had just unleashed. I did not flinch. I did not even step back. I simply stood my ground, holding my phone and watching her sprint across the manicured grass. Before Jasmine could cross the final 10 feet, Marcus moved. My head of security had been leaning casually against the polished black fender of the Maybach parked in the driveway, observing the entire confrontation with quiet professional detachment. The moment Jasmine's feet hit the grass, he stepped forward. He did not run. He simply positioned his massive frame directly between me and my charging sister, creating an immovable human wall. Jasmine slammed into him with the full force of her momentum. Marcus did not yield a single inch. He reached out with terrifying speed and precision, catching her firmly by the shoulders and stopping her dead in her tracks. "Let me go!" she screamed, thrashing wildly against his grip. Her designer heels tore deep, jagged gouges into the pristine lawn as she kicked and struggled. "Let me go, you hired thug. I am going to kill her. DeAndre, do something. Tell him to let me go." DeAndre took a sudden, aggressive half-step forward, his patriarchal instincts momentarily overriding his shock. But Marcus simply shifted his cold, dark gaze over Jasmine's thrashing shoulder and locked eyes with my father. Marcus did not speak. He did not issue a threat. He merely looked at the man. DeAndre stopped immediately, his heavy boots freezing on the patio stone. The supreme alpha of the Washington family was entirely paralyzed by a single look from my security detail, because the true power dynamic of the yard had been completely and irrevocably exposed. I looked at my sister as she continued to scream and writhe against Marcus's iron grip, completely abandoning any shred of dignity in front of the 30 relatives watching from the patio. Aunts and uncles who had practically worshipped her since childhood were now pulling out their smartphones to record the golden child behaving like a rabid animal. I raised my phone back to my face. The call had never been disconnected. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice projecting clearly over Jasmine's hysterical screaming. "I am still here, Ms. Washington." The crisp, metallic voice of my corporate attorney replied through the speakerphone, entirely unfazed by the background noise. "The termination protocols for Mr. Blackwood have been successfully executed, and the compliance department has been notified. How would you like to proceed with the secondary target?" "Let us address the commercial lease for Blackwood and Associates," I instructed, keeping my eyes locked on my sister's panicked face. Jasmine instantly stopped fighting. Her thrashing ceased, and her body went entirely rigid in Marcus's grasp. She knew exactly what commercial lease I was referring to. Her boutique law firm occupied the premium top-floor suite of a downtown high-rise, a building I had discreetly acquired through a subsidiary holding company 6 months prior. "I have the lease agreement pulled up on my terminal now. Ms. Washington." Mr. Sterling confirmed, the sound of rapid keyboard clicking echoing faintly through the speaker. "Mr. Sterling, regarding the commercial lease for Jasmine's law firm." I began, making certain my diction was razor-sharp, so that every single word carried across the lawn to the silent audience on the patio. "Attempting to defraud the landlord is a direct violation of the Morality and Criminal Conduct Clause embedded in Section 4 of her commercial agreement." "Indeed it is, Ms. Washington," Mr. Sterling replied. "Plotting felony wire fraud and identity theft against the holding company's chief executive officer constitutes an immediate and uncurable default of the lease terms." "Serve her with a 24-hour eviction notice," I commanded, my voice cold and absolute. "I want the property management team dispatched immediately. Change the locks at exactly 8 a.m. tomorrow morning." "No!" Jasmine shrieked, a fresh wave of terror washing over her. "Chloe, you cannot do this. My entire firm is in that office. My client files, my servers, my legal documents. I have an active trial starting on Thursday. If I am locked out, I will be disbarred for failing to represent my clients. You are destroying my entire life. You destroyed your own life the moment you told your husband to forge my signature on a federal mortgage document," I replied, my tone completely devoid of mercy. "You are a lawyer, Jasmine. You really should have read your lease agreement more carefully." "Understood, Ms. Washington," Mr. Sterling stated, cutting through her pleas. "The eviction notice is being generated now." Local law enforcement will be scheduled to escort the property managers tomorrow morning to ensure the locks are changed without incident. All physical assets remaining inside the suite at 8 a.m. will be legally seized and liquidated to cover her outstanding rental arrears. Is there anything further? That will be all, Mr. Sterling, I said, tapping the screen to end the call. The profound catastrophic reality of her situation crashed down upon Jasmine all at once. She was not just losing a battle of wills. She was losing her income, her professional license, her husband's career, and her entire public identity in the span of 15 minutes. The sheer weight of the destruction severed the last remaining thread of her composure. The fight completely drained out of her body. Marcus, feeling the sudden lack of resistance, immediately stepped back, releasing his grip on her shoulders and folding his hands neatly behind his back. Without his support, Jasmine simply crumpled. Her legs gave out beneath her, entirely unable to support her own weight. She dropped heavily onto the edge of the lawn, right where the manicured grass met the damp, freshly watered soil of Vivian's prized flower beds. She hit the ground hard. The wet, muddy earth immediately splashed up, soaking into the pristine silk fabric of her expensive designer dress. The dark soil stained the pastel material, ruining the garment instantly. She did not try to stand back up. She did not try to brush the dirt from her clothes. Jasmine collapsed forward onto her hands and knees in the mud, bowing her head toward the earth. She began to weep hysterically, her chest heaving with loud, ugly, jagged sobs that echoed across the silent property. The golden child of the Washington family, the woman who had demanded half my fortune, was now kneeling in the dirt, completely broken. The patio remained trapped in a state of absolute paralysis. The scent of charred meat from the grill still hung heavy in the warm air, a stark domestic contrast to the corporate execution taking place on the grass. My revelation hung over them, an invisible guillotine that had just dropped, severing the Washington family hierarchy at the neck. I watched the realization spread like a highly contagious virus. It hit Uncle Marcus first. He slowly lowered his unlit cigar, placing it carefully on the edge of the stone fire pit, as if any sudden movement might draw my attention to him. Aunt Valerie took 2 distinct steps backward, retreating into the shadows of the patio awning, trying to physically erase her complicity. They had all come to watch a slaughter, and they were currently standing ankle-deep in the ruin of their patriarch. I kept the sleek black device raised perfectly level with my face. The absolute silence was broken only by the ragged, wet sobbing of my sister in the mud and the shallow, panicked breathing of her husband collapsed in his patio chair. But I was not finished. The surgical dismantling of this family required one final precise incision. I turned my gaze away from the wreckage of my sibling and locked eyes entirely on my father. DeAndre was leaning heavily against the wooden planks of the picnic table, the very same table where he had tried to force me to sign away half my life just moments ago. The imposing, terrifying man who had ruled our family with an iron fist and a booming voice now looked small, frail, and utterly terrified. I brought the phone closer to my mouth. "Mr. Sterling, there is one final piece of business for the afternoon," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear through the speakerphone. "I am ready, Ms. Washington," Mr. Sterling replied. DeAndre raised a thick, trembling hand. He opened his mouth, his jaw working frantically, but the booming baritone he had used to intimidate me since childhood completely failed him. "Chloe, wait," he rasped, a desperate, pathetic plea that died in the humid air. I ignored him, turning slightly to address the phone. "And sever the vendor contract with my father's business due to his outstanding defaults," I instructed, my tone echoing with absolute finality. "Call the debts in. All of them." "Understood, Ms. Washington." Mr. Sterling responded, the sound of rapid keystrokes confirming the execution of my order. "The termination notice for Washington Logistics is being transmitted to their corporate office now. The debt recall notices will be served via certified courier by tomorrow morning. They have 48 hours to produce the liquid capital before we begin asset seizure." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. That concludes our business today," I said, tapping the screen and sliding the phone back into the pocket of my silk suit. DeAndre stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck by the device. His heavy boots caught the edge of a stray patio paver, and he crashed back against the stone masonry of the outdoor grill. His eyes were wide, unseeing, fixed on the terrifying reality that had just consumed his life. Washington Logistics was not just a company to him. It was his identity, his shield, his ultimate excuse for every failure as a father. He had missed my high school graduation, claiming a critical emergency meeting with that exact vendor. He had skipped my college commencement because the logistics fleet required his personal oversight. He had spent my entire life telling me that his business was the true Washington legacy, the only thing that mattered, and that my technological pursuits were a worthless distraction. Now the worthless distraction had just bought his legacy and decided to sell it for scrap. He knew exactly what calling in the debts meant. He had leveraged absolutely everything to keep his failing trucks on the road. He had taken second mortgages on this very house. He had drained the family retirement accounts. Without the primary vendor contract, his revenue stream was zero. With the debts called in, his company was effectively bankrupt. "My trucks," DeAndre whispered, staring at his trembling hands. "You cannot take my fleet. That is 30 years of my life, Chloe. I will sign the trust. I will rip up the contract. Just give me my company back." The sheer delusion of his bargaining attempt was almost pitiful. "I do not want your failing company, DeAndre," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "You ran it into the ground with your own arrogance. I simply bought the debt so I could be the one to finally turn off the lights." That was the breaking point for Vivian. My mother had spent the last 15 minutes watching her golden child face disbarment, her son-in-law lose his career, and now her husband lose their entire financial foundation. The luxury vehicles, the country club memberships, the designer wardrobes, and the high society image she had meticulously curated through decades of enabling DeAndre's financial abuse were instantly eradicated. Vivian lost her mind. A guttural screech tore from her throat. She lunged toward me, her eyes wild and feral, her hands curled into claws. "Marcus." My security detail immediately stepped forward from the edge of the driveway, ready to intercept her, but I raised my hand, signaling him to hold his position. I wanted her to get close. I wanted to look directly into her eyes as her fake world ended. Vivian stopped just inches from my face, her chest heaving, her perfectly styled hair falling in ragged strands across her forehead. "You are a monster," she screamed, spit flying from her lips. Her voice was shrill, echoing off the neighboring houses. "You are a cold, unnatural monster. We raised you. We put food on your table. We kept a roof over your head. We gave you everything. You owe us." I stood perfectly still, letting her frantic, desperate justification of felony fraud and decades of emotional abuse wash over me. I looked at the woman who had stood silently by while my father mocked my ambitions. The woman who had bought Jasmine a new car for getting a mediocre grade while refusing to co-sign a microscopic student loan for my tuition. The woman who had actively conspired to steal the only safe space my grandmother had ever given me. She believed that providing the bare legal minimum of biological survival equated to a lifetime of indentured servitude. She believed that paying for groceries 20 years ago entitled her to the billions I had built with my own bleeding hands. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her hysterical energy. I simply unzipped the front compartment of my leather portfolio bag. I reached inside and pulled out a pristine stack of manila envelopes, the thick, heavy kind used for serving legal notices. I held the stack out, offering it to the woman, screaming in my face. I stare at my mother, completely devoid of emotion or sympathy. "You gave me trauma," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying deadpan whisper that cut through her hysterics like ice. "I survived it. Now I'm giving you an invoice." The manila envelopes hung in the space between us, heavy with the calculated cost of decades of psychological damage. Vivian stared at the pristine stack of paper, her mind completely failing to process the reality of her own irrelevance. The aggressive maternal entitlement that had fueled her entire existence simply short-circuited. She reached out with a trembling hand but could not bring herself to take the documents. She knew that accepting them meant accepting her absolute defeat. Behind her, the patio had descended into a pathetic symphony of ruin. Preston was hyperventilating. He had slipped completely out of the wrought iron chair and was now kneeling on the rough stone pavers, his expensive slacks tearing against the grit. He was gasping, dragging greedy lungfuls of air into his chest, while his hands grasped blindly at the empty space in front of him. "Chloe, please," he wheezed, his voice a high-pitched, agonizing whine. "I can fix this. I am a top-tier financial manager. I can be an asset to Aura Equity. I know the local markets. I know the zoning boards. I was just following Jasmine's directives. She pushed me into the fraud. I did not want to do it. I can work for you. Please do not take my license. Do not take my pension." He was throwing his own wife under the bus without a single second of hesitation, sacrificing the woman he had vowed to protect just to save a fraction of his corporate identity. Jasmine heard him, but she did not even have the energy to argue. She was still on her hands and knees in the ruined flower bed, the wet mud seeping through the silk of her dress, clinging to her skin like a physical manifestation of her shame. She crawled forward a few inches, her manicured fingers digging into the wet soil. "My firm, Chloe," she sobbed, her mascara running in thick black rivers down her cheeks. "My associates rely on me. My clients rely on me. We are sisters. We share the same blood. You cannot leave me with absolutely nothing. I will apologize. I will do whatever you want. Just tell the property managers to stand down." I looked down at her, the sister who had spent my entire adolescence mocking my clothes, stealing my opportunities, and whispering poison into our parents' ears. She was bargaining with currency she no longer possessed. Then came the pivot. Seeing that rage, intimidation, and pathetic groveling were utterly ineffective against the fortress I had built, DeAndre and Vivian attempted the most insidious manipulation of all. They tried to rewrite history in real time. DeAndre forced himself to stand upright, pushing away from the brick grill. He smoothed the front of his shirt and tried to assemble his features into a mask of patriarchal pride. It was a grotesque, shaking imitation of the man he used to be. "You beat us," he said, his voice trembling but attempting a hollow, booming resonance. "You outsmarted the old man. I have to admit, Chloe, it was a brilliant strategic execution. Ruthless, cold-blooded." He took a tentative step forward, forcing a rigid smile. "Where do you think you learned that ruthlessness?" he asked, opening his arms in a gesture of manufactured solidarity. "I taught you that. We pushed you. We made you hungry. If we had coddled you, if we had handed you everything on a silver platter like we did for Jasmine, you never would have built an empire. We made you a wolf, Chloe." Vivian seized the narrative lifeline instantly. Her tears vanished, replaced by a manic, desperate brightness. "Yes," she gasped, stepping to DeAndre's side and nodding frantically. "We had to be hard on you so the world would not break you. We knew you were special. We knew you had the brilliance to surpass all of us. Our tough love made you a billionaire. We did this for you. We are so proud of you, baby. We are so incredibly proud of the titan you have become." The audacity of the lie hung in the humid afternoon air. They were actually trying to claim credit for the very survival mechanisms I had been forced to develop just to endure their abuse. They were trying to rebrand decades of neglect, belittlement, and psychological warfare as a masterclass in parenting. I stared at my mother and father, completely devoid of any emotion. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I simply felt an overwhelming, profound emptiness. Looking at their desperate, sweating faces, I realized the absolute truth. They did not love me. They had never loved me. They only loved what I represented. They loved the capital I controlled, the power I wielded, and the social status my bank accounts could instantly restore to them. I was not their daughter. I was a hostile corporate acquisition they were frantically trying to merge with. "You did not make me tough," I told them, my voice echoing over the silent yard, cutting through the humid air with surgical precision. The fake smiles on their faces faltered. "You did not teach me how to be a wolf." I continued, keeping my gaze locked on DeAndre's terrified eyes. "You taught me that the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones most likely to bleed you dry. You made me realize that you were the enemy, and I do not negotiate with enemies." I reached into my leather portfolio bag one final time. I pulled out a thick, heavy stack of documents bound by aggressive red legal seals. I handed the stack over my shoulder to Marcus. "Distribute these," I commanded. Marcus moved with silent, terrifying efficiency. He stepped around me, crossing the patio with long, deliberate strides. He dropped the first thick packet directly into the mud in front of Jasmine's face. He tossed the second packet onto Preston's lap. He pressed the third packet firmly against DeAndre's chest, forcing the older man to grab it or let it fall. The final packet he handed directly to Vivian. "What is this?" Vivian whispered, her hands shaking so badly the thick paper rustled loudly. "Those are legally binding preemptive restraining orders and ironclad cease and desist directives." I explained, my voice devoid of any warmth or mercy. "They have already been signed by a judge and filed with the county clerk." DeAndre stared at the red seals, his mouth opening and closing in silent shock. "Effective immediately, you are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of my residence, my corporate offices, or any property owned by Aura Equity Partners," I stated, dictating the terms of their permanent exile. "You are barred from attempting to contact me via phone, email, physical mail, or third-party intermediaries." I took a slow, deliberate step backward, putting physical distance between myself and the toxic wreckage of my bloodline. But most importantly, I said, delivering the final fatal blow. "If any of you use my name, my likeness, or claim any relation to me in the media, to your friends, or in the business world, to secure credit, sympathy, or social standing, my legal team will bury you so deep you will not see daylight. You will not write a book. You will not give an interview. You will cease to acknowledge that I exist." I turned my back on them. I did not wait for a response. I did not look back at Jasmine weeping into the soil. I did not listen to Preston gasping for breath, or DeAndre uttering a final broken apology that drifted across the manicured lawn. I simply walked away. The extended family members standing on the grass parted like the Red Sea, keeping their eyes cast firmly downward, terrified that making eye contact might draw my attention to their own bank accounts. I crossed the driveway, my heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete. Marcus was already waiting, holding open the heavy, armored door of the Maybach. I stepped into the immaculate, climate-controlled interior. The scent of rich leather and pristine air filtration washed over me, instantly separating me from the humid, chaotic atmosphere of the suburban backyard. Marcus closed the door. The heavy, satisfying thud of the armored door shutting was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It instantly severed the noise of my toxic family, cutting off their weeping and begging forever. The silence inside the cabin was absolute. The driver smoothly shifted the vehicle into gear. The massive engine purred silently as the Maybach glided away from the curb, pulling out of the neighborhood without a single bump or hesitation. I leaned back against the plush leather headrest and looked out the heavily tinted window. Through the darkened glass, I watched the figures on the lawn shrinking into insignificance. The massive house, the weeping sister, the broken patriarch, they all faded away until they were nothing more than a bad memory disappearing in the rearview mirror. I reached forward and opened the chilled center console. I pulled out a crystal flute and poured myself a generous measure of vintage champagne. The crisp golden bubbles rose to the surface, catching the soft ambient light of the cabin. I raised the glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The cold, bright liquid washed away the last lingering taste of the afternoon. I closed my eyes and breathed in the quiet. I was finally completely and truly at peace in my billion-dollar empire. The most profound takeaway from this story is that shared blood does not entitle anyone to your endless loyalty or resources. When toxic relatives constantly belittle your ambitions and exploit your kindness, walking away is not an act of cruelty, it is essential self-preservation. True security is forged through financial independence and unwavering self-belief, rather than seeking validation from those who consistently undermine your worth. Ultimately, the ultimate response to systemic family abuse is undeniable self-made success and the formidable courage to establish ironclad boundaries to protect the peaceful, thriving life you have built from the ground up. If this story of reclaiming your power and setting unapologetic boundaries resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe for more empowering content, and share your own journey of independence in the comments below.